I think the received wisdom that 95 was a disaster, I think is completely wrong. I think it was important that Republicans stood for principle, and it actually led to some serious solutions to the fiscal and economic challenges facing this country.
That was Republican Senator Ted Cruz speaking last week at a Heritage Foundation event. And the non-disaster he is referring to there is the 1995 government shutdown. Ted Cruz is trying to convince conservatives to forget the more unpleasant things they might remember about that shutdown and its ramifications, because he thinks the key to convincing Democrats to just throw out the Affordable Care Act, the signature achievement of the Obama era, is a Republican Party ready to shut the government down over it. And while Ted Cruz has been joined on his quest to defund Obamacare at any cost by Republican luminaries like Rand Paul of Kentucky and Mike Lee of Utah, the Republican Party is by no means united behind him. Tom Coburn said it won't work. Richard Burr called it the dumbest idea he'd ever heard of. And now the party's most recent standard bearer has come out with some words of caution of his own. Mitt Romney telling a room full of Republicans yesterday, quote, "I badly want Obamacare to go away, and stripping it of funds has appeal, but we need to exercise great care about any talk of shutting down the government. What would come next when soldiers aren't paid, when seniors fear for their Medicare and Social Security, and when the FBI is off duty? I'm afraid that in the final analysis, Obamacare would get its funding, our party would suffer in the next election, and the people of the nation would not be happy." Those are all excellent questions as we continue our conversation about governing through gridlock. Back with us at the table, Mattie Duppler of Americans for Tax Reform and Norm Ornstein of the American Enterprise Institute. And this is, to me, the other side of this gridlock, right? There's a bunch of stuff. It's not that nothing happens. Some stuff happens, and then some stuff, when it doesn't happen, like funding the government or raising the debt ceiling, has a capacity to cause widespread disruption and even chaos in the American economy or to services Americans depend on. And that, too, has become, I think, kind of a bit of a sickness here. There's become a belief that instead of sort of going to the table and ironing out differences in pieces of legislation, and what gets you to the other end is a desire to get something done, there's kind of a hostage-taking mentality that's come about.
You know, and I'm all for a principled fight. That's why I live in Washington. I love that kind of thing. But the problem with the government shutdown fight is Republicans are the party of less government. So if government stops doing things, people who want government to do things are automatically going to get upset. You know, I live in D.C. They won't look after parking, so I'll be excited about that. I can park wherever I want. But, you know, there are real effects that people feel and that they hold political parties accountable for. The other thing with the government shutdown thing, you know, Senator Lee is talking about the continuing resolution, the funding of the government. But this is going to run up against, of course, another debt limit debate. And that takes on a whole another character when we talk about that. But to the American public, people who aren't sitting in Washington, D.C. watching this, you know, every second as it goes by, those two mean the same thing, even though there's two distinctly different battles. So for Republicans and Democrats who are trying to iron out these problems here in Washington, they're going to have to be thinking 10 steps ahead rather than just this one, which is kind of the linear thinking on the defund Obamacare on the CR strategy.
And Norm, I think that the light in this puts a waiver debate is that it does seem to me that the approach to negotiating and the approach to legislating has changed. That one of the reasons you see the executive branch, and also for that matter, the Federal Reserve and some other agencies taking more power as things don't get done in Washington, is that there's become a kind of a giving up, a belief that if you've got a party in the Republican Party now that is willing to put the debt limit in jeopardy, that is willing to possibly shut down the government, that there aren't deals to be made there. And at a certain point, it's time to start finding other ways to govern.
And that's a sad phenomenon, because you don't want those decisions made by others outside of the elective branches doing give and take. What I find so astonishing about this is you have a mindset that is the basic functions of government are not something that we have responsibility for. It's something we're going to give to you in return for your giving up something that is a law that has been passed. We're trying to sabotage it in other ways, but by God, we're going to hold that hostage. We're going to hold the full faith and credit of the United States hostage. We've had games played with the debt limit before, but before this era, everybody knew they were going to make it happen because it was irresponsible not to. What we have now is leaders like John Boehner who go from saying, we can't let that happen, that would be crazy and terrible for the United States, now bullied by his own caucus and cowed into submission, saying, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to use the Boehner rule. We'll increase the debt limit if you do another set of hundreds of billions of dollars in additional cuts beyond what we've already done. This is not like governing that we've seen before, and it's beyond irresponsible.
And quickly, Mattie, in the long run, isn't the danger here that Congress and accountable branches and democratic branches of government begin to fall in power as opposed to sort of more unaccountable, more executive, more independent branches?
I think that that is definitely the worry for a lot of folks who are in Congress and folks who are just observers of what's going on in Washington right now. But we have to remember things like the sequester were kind of supposed to embody this idea that we'll just have an automatic spending cut because the parties can't come to an agreement on where we should be having cuts. This is the kind of action that should promote that kind of thinking, that should get lawmakers thinking about prioritizing spending, about thinking what we actually want government to do. And the problem with the government shutdown fight is that you only have one side of each of that argument. You don't get to talk about where spending can be curtailed and where government can be made more efficient.
Mattie Duppler from Americans for Tax Reform and Norm Ornstein from the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Yeah.
That is all in for this evening.